This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. Once a month, Mayor Vi Lyles is on the program. She's back today at a momentous time as Charlotte and the nation have been rocked by two crises, COVID-19 and the recent protests over the death of George Floyd. Those two things intersect with many different concerns. You know them well, so let's not belabor them. Let's just get right to the conversation. Madam Mayor, welcome back to the program. Thank you for being
Good
here.
morning, Mike, and good morning to all of your listeners.
And we have breaking news this morning from the Washington Post. It says the GOP expects to move its convention to Jacksonville, Florida. That would be the big night. The business stuff will stay here tentatively. All this is still tentative, and we'll talk about that later in the program. But before we talk about COVID-19, before we talk about the convention, yesterday a group of 17 Charlotte artists, inspired by this newly decorated 16th Street in Washington, D.C., heading to the White House, painted the words Black Lives Matter in large letters on a part of South Tryon Street. The mayor in D.C. is responsible for suggesting that idea there. What role did you play in this? Did you play any role in this? I know you welcomed them, but did you suggest it?
No, I did not. I have to give that kudo to our planning staff who saw this as a way to communicate to the citizens and also to contribute to what I think is a protest that we're having, but doing it in a way that they had two objectives. One, to do something that was around the protest and people understanding what Black Lives means. And then the second thing, we used in Charlotte artists that have been struggling with the pandemic, that their galleries are closed, they haven't been able to paint, and a number of them were there, and we paid them to paint a letter each. And you can see the diversity, but all of it had at the end a great theme that talked about the emotions and the tone and tenor of what we're doing right now, what we're dealing with right now. So I want to thank, there were a number of artists. I mean, there were over 14. And I heard someone say it was, you saw black, white, brown, everybody was out there and they were all helping each other. And people were so surprised to be able to just walk past a major street in our city and see that kind of creative effort around something that's so important in today's environment.
Yeah, I watched some TV reports on this yesterday as they were still painting that phrase on the street, and the people they interviewed, from artists who are participating to passersby, found this to be a healing, hopeful, positive thing in Charlotte. It kind of says something about the city, and you've been saying for years that we are inclusive. So here's a demonstration of it. How many other cities, aside from Washington, have done something similar?
Well, I think that there are more. I think Miriam Bowser in DC started it, but she did it more, I think, in line with the issues that she has to deal with. As DC is the District of Columbia, not a state. She's a mayor, but the president's living in her community. So I think hers was much more symbolic in a way that was a reaction to what was going on in her community. Ours was the same reaction, but we also were trying to be inclusive. You know, we talk about creative people being here and the idea that we could support them. As I walked through and I spoke to every artist for every letter, I was so proud that they said this was making a difference for them and what they're doing. And I'm really proud to say that we can support them in that way.
Charlotte 5 reported that one of those artists, whose name is, forgive me, Dammit Wesley, told them, shout out to Charlotte for being progressive enough to let something like this happen. And then he added,
also, thank you, police officers, for not gassing me in the middle of the street. Not saying that you want, but we'll see tomorrow night. Love you guys. Peace.
So he has a sense of humor, but humor comes from truth. What's your assessment of how CMPD has handled these protests the last several weeks?
You know, we've had approximately 30 protests in 12 days. Our officers are working 12-hour shifts. We call them back from whatever they were doing with their families, any vacations were canceled, all of those things happened. I want you to know that our concern has always been around our protesters having the ability to lawfully protest. And we had a tough night last Tuesday. And the thing that, as I've said before, the thing about going through a difficult experience, it causes you to really pause and rethink. And Chief Putney and Chief Jennings, yesterday Chief Putney specifically yesterday talked about that incident. We've got three reviews of Tuesday night. We have changed the way that we're addressing the crowds by telling them what we're going to do and where they can go to make it possible for them to continue to protest lawfully. That's a major difference and a major change. So I'm really proud of CMPD's ability. We all are using this new word, pivot. And they pivoted from a Tuesday night until yesterday to say what we're doing, and we're going to do it differently. We're going to make sure people are informed about their choices, and we're going to have protests that are lawful. But I have to say that we've had approximately 20 officers injured. Now, these injuries aren't always major, but they come close. And I think that if people don't know what it's like to stand there, so it's difficult. Because you don't know what's coming at you. And at the same time, we have to let people understand that this isn't something that we should just take lightly and increase the efforts to tamp it down. We need to increase the effort to have it spoken out loud and to be a place that we can have this conversation. And that's why I've been so proud of the Charlotte City Council for coming to a resolution, to referring things to our Safe Communities Committee, to be able to have a focus on how we police our city without having the rhetoric of defund police or not having the rhetoric that we've had or seen across this country. This city is resilient, and we still have the vestiges of dialogue and progress together.
Most of the protesters in the last several weeks here and around the country have been peaceful. There have been bad actors among them in almost every city in the country. Most of the response by police to protesters, most of it has been, as far as we know, professional and peaceful. There have been incidences like what happened on last Tuesday night, which seems to be an aberration. Now, I don't know that it is, but it seems to be. We certainly have had instances where Charlotte Mecklenburg police have used tear gas and rubber bullets and pepper bullets.
No rubber bullets, Mike.
Okay.
We do not use rubber bullets. We use tear gas and pepper spray and balls. And the pepper spray, the pepper balls have the same pepper that the police officers wear on their belt. So we also carry the pepper spray so that we don't have to use weapons and batons. So that's something that we are consistently trying to avoid the use of weapons.
So my point was going to be that on Tuesday night, we have an aberration. We have a situation where a police formed a line. They kind of herded people into a one-block area, sealed them off in that one-block area. There was no means of escape, and then began to fire tear gas and also these pepper pellets from the rooftops down onto these people who had no place to go. I'm wondering if you know, because I don't know that. Was that standard operating procedure? Did a person in the field make that decision? Did they have to radio it back to headquarters? Was Chief Putney as shocked as the protesters and many of us watching this on TV or hearing about it later were?
I hope that our listeners will listen to the chief's press briefing that was held on June 9th yesterday, and he took full accountability. The command center is the command center. And all of these tactics are reviewed daily, hourly practically, and executed as a result of the command center. And he said that he takes accountability for it. He also takes accountability for having 3 reviews: the SBI review of policy, and that could be criminal if they decide to do something, the internal review that they would do, and they have come out with changes. Yesterday, the chief talked about what we're going to do differently from dispersal and how we're going to try to help people protest lawfully. And then the third thing is that we have a federal review as well. So it will come out of a review of domestic policies for around these activities. So again, we have to understand that we train, and we've trained in de-escalation, we've trained in conversations, we've done so much work in this community. We have to hold on to that. And then at the same time, allow CMPD and its leadership to say, This is real time work, and we're going to fix it every time.
But at last week, when as you were condemning this incident at a press conference, the police chief released a statement saying, quote, "There is nothing to indicate whatsoever that there was intentional abuse on the part of our officers." Has he changed his stance on that?
I can't speak for the chief, but I think that the response that he has made is appropriate, that he is the leader. He is in the command center. He's there. The tactics are discussed throughout the department. The platoons of those officers are taking commands. And that's what I think we have to understand. I also want to say that this is something that in times of comfort, we can be in that reflective moment. And to think that they didn't get comfortable, they got very uncomfortable with the reactions that they heard from every part of the city, that they changed immediately. And they said, we not only will review it, we'll have 2 additional external reviews, and we are changing our policies. That now when we talk about dispersal, we're going to talk about it really clearly, but they're also going to add a way that you can move. So the last time it was like, you must disperse. But now it would be, you must disperse, 4th Street is open. That's what we need to do. We need to help people obey if they don't understand, if they can't see the commands, and they can do something, we can do something about that. And that's what we're doing.
So on Monday night, City Council voted 9-2 to support a motion by at-large member Braxton Winston to prohibit the police from buying tear gas for the next fiscal year, which will begin on July the 1st. All the Democrats on council voted yes. The 2 Republicans voted no. You don't vote, but where do you stand on that?
I stand that we need to have the review. I think that there's a lot of this is so common to me. You know, when the police would come in and they would say fireworks, I was thinking when I grew up, that's a long string of firecrackers. You light it and it's boom, 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 boom. Mm-hmm. When they talk about fireworks, they're talking about explosive launchers that can actually injure people. And I know fireworks can injure people as well, but there's a need for first, let's all get the same language and understand what those words mean. Let's understand how the use of those tools are done by police. And then let's have a community agreement, open discussion about what we will do and how we deal with escalation when we can't de-escalate. And that's what as I said, I'm really proud of the city council for taking the time. And I believe that motion was appropriate. I think that it's always difficult to be on one side or the other. And I believe that I can't speak for our 2 Republican members, but I know that they are as consistently supportive of efforts to improve the city as all the 9 Democrats, as well as I am.
The order that City Council passed was that they could not buy any more tear gas, at least for the next year, beginning July 1st. But that doesn't mean they can't use it, and it doesn't mean they don't have it in their arsenal. And when we come back, I want to ask about that, because I'm sure that some of the money that the city got to ensure security for the Republican convention went to buying tear gas. So let's talk about that and more when we come back with Mayor Vi Lyles in just a moment at Charlotte Talks on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and Birdhouse on the Greenway, now featuring an online store for ordering and delivering of birdseed and supplies. Detailed information at birdhouseonthegreenway.com. And Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina, supporting virtual doctor visits so people can continue to get routine healthcare checkups and other urgent care. More information at bluecrossnc.com/coronavirus. Our conversation with Mayor Vi Lyles continues in just a moment. This is the WFAE end of fiscal year fund drive. NPR and WFAE are among the most trusted information sources you have, and your contributions, you listening right there, are the cornerstone of our operation. So please do your part now to pay for the news and conversation you enjoy and depend on. Call 704-549-9000 right now and make a pledge, or online at WFAE.org. Thanks.
Rather than holding up a Bible, America's faith leaders are urging the president to spend more time reading it. As people raise up their voices, so too have Christian, Jewish, and Muslim luminaries. We'll hear why so many now see their response to this moment as much political as it is spiritual next time on 1A.
1A from 10 to noon after Charlotte Talks. Here on Listener Funded 90.7 WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source.
It's Charlotte Talks on Listener Funded, 90.7 WFAE and 90.3 WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking today with Mayor Vi Lyles about many different things, and we're on the protests that recently have engulfed the nation, as a matter of fact. The city council voted this week, as we were talking about, to ban the purchase of tear gas by CMPD for the next year. Doesn't mean they can't use it. Doesn't mean they don't have it. Do you know how much they have on hand? I mean, we're talking about a police department that was gearing up until this morning, I guess, for a Republican National Convention here in Charlotte.
You know, the convention, whether it's in Charlotte or Jacksonville, as when a president comes to your city, Homeland Security, Secret Service, and your local police department coordinate plans. And I'm sure that they have tabletop exercises that cover every option that you can ever imagine. And so I think that if you do that, then you have to have the tools for all of those options and hope that nothing happens. Our goal is that if we host the convention, if we are able to host the Republican Committee, the National Republican Committee meetings, that's more like the business meetings that any major institution would have. I always thought that the president was the person that their focus, I mean, security is important for everyone, but any city will tell you, you do not want to have an incident when you have the president in your city. So if Jacksonville is the city, I'm sure that Homeland Security, Secret Service, and their chief of police are talking about those same exercises and what we'll do.
So
they'll do.
I don't know that you really answered my question, but we'll get back to that in a minute. When
I'm
Braxton,
sorry, Mike, you asked me, did I know? Yes, I do not know. Thank you for reminding me.
When Braxton Winston was on this program in the last couple of weeks, I asked him if a neutered police department should worry him or us. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that law enforcement did without tear gas for a very long time before tear gas was invented. But Chief Putney has said that in the absence of tear gas, things might get worse. The police would have to resort to brute physical force, the use of shields and batons to disperse crowds, a practice that he called inhumane. Are we boxing the police in by limiting their choices of agents that they use to disperse crowds?
Well, one, we haven't limited their choices yet. What we've said is pause, let's learn, get educated about what our choices are, and come to an agreed understanding, not just with the council, but with CMPD and the community. So I think a lot of this is about expectations. So what should you expect when this incident happens and the next, and if this happens, what is the consequence of it? And we need to establish that, but we need to do that with the community. And we also, I don't want to lose in this discussion, Mike, the George Floyd was like the last straw on the camel's back. And so we can't lose that this debate around, we've had it in our own community, Jonathan Farrell, Danquarius Franklin. And this, taking this, actually seeing someone die on national TV over and over again, we've got to have a better conversation. So we have not said that we're limiting. What we have said is we're going to learn and we're going to review and we're going to come to something that people can understand.
At the council meeting on Monday night, Braxton Winston took issue with the fact that the police only have, if you take the tear gas away, they only have the option of brute physical force. And he compared that to the approach of Birmingham, Alabama's Bull Connor and his use of German shepherds and fire hoses in that city during the civil rights movement.
If you cannot figure out how to deal with human beings without the tactics of violence and fear, the human beings that make up this city will be here step by step to show you how to deal with us as the sentient beings that we are.
Truly an emotional approach to this. Was that the most emotion that came out of council meeting on Monday night?
Well, we've had a number of discussions, and I can't speak for every council member, but I speak for myself. And I would say that we can get very comfortable very quickly in Charlotte with the status quo. We kind of feel like we've had an incident and we fixed it and we're moving on. But the incidents that we're talking about, or that the council's talking about, the community is talking about right now, that's not just a small fix. So we've talked a lot about CMPD and what that means, but I've gotten letters talking about how our corporations, the diversity and inclusion in the C-suites, the diversity and inclusion in corporate boards. We are now the 15th largest city in this country, and we're very proud of that. But at the same time, as the 15th largest city, we have to begin to look at ourselves differently. I just can't imagine that we're still having people paid such low wages they can't afford to live in the city, that they don't have health care. And the old style, I think this is where the crux of this issue is. We've come to a place where we have to understand that racism and the incidents of having race in our city, and you had a session on this with an author, The Accidental Presidents. Remember that session? And they talked about how Lincoln had a vision and Andrew Jackson tanked it. And so we've been trying to recover from Andrew Jackson's actions for 200 years now or more.
Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson,
Vice President,
sorry.
yeah.
And yes, Johnson, excuse me.
Lincoln's
I
last
get
vice
passionate
president.
about these things as well. And but I think that what we have to do is begin to think, how do we actually look at Black and brown people? What assumptions are we making? Former FBI Director James Comey actually said, well, you can have African Americans on a police force and they can come in, but after a while, they get preconceived notions about things. I think we have preconceived notions throughout the city. And that's just what we've got to deal with.
This argument is so multifaceted
Yeah.
because there's so many different moving pieces of this. I think that Braxton Winston's approach is an immediate fix. Here's something that happened. Here's what they did. Let's stop them from doing that, but not letting them buy anymore. That's an immediate fix. Ed Driggs, a Republican, and Tariq Bakari, another Republican on council, voted no on this, but they took a different approach. Driggs said that he believed the changes that are needed are complex and large in scale. One's a long-term approach, one's a short-term approach. Are either of them right or wrong? Can we do them both? Should we do them both?
It's not a question of should, it's we must do them both. If we look across this country, and this is where I say, if Charlotte's going to be a city that continues to grow and continues to build on our vision and our values, we have to do both. So yes, we do need to do the short term. We do need to focus on in our government house. We need to look at everything that we're doing, whether it's from our transit system, our segregated neighborhoods, our affordable housing policy, and our way of policing communities in the city. But at the same time, this city government is about a $2 billion operation for Charlotte, for our city. Now, what is the value of Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Honeywell, and what do they do to help us move this forward? Because this is about our residents, our activists, our protesters, but it's basically around Black people who have felt like they have never had the ability to gain a foothold in the American economy because of all of the discriminations that have happened. And I encourage all of us to look beyond the Black Lives Matter, the slogan and the logo and all of that, to learn a little bit of history about what has happened. I've lived some of that history, and most Black people can have it, and people consider me a success. But I can tell you there are times in my life I didn't get to get a new school book until I got to high school, when they integrated the schools of Columbia, South Carolina. I was never allowed to go into the white library until I was in 10th grade. It's just these small things that people forget about, and they say, but look how well we're doing now. Well, though, you can look on the outside and still carry great pain on the inside.
This is something that's also like the news cycle, moving incredibly fast. The number of people who support Black Lives Matter has changed more in the last 2 weeks than it has in the last, I think, 5 years, according to the New York Times. If I have the numbers, actually, in the last 2 weeks, in the last 2 years, that's how much it's changed because of these protests. And over the weekend, Braxton Winston said he did not have the votes on council to get that resolution through that they couldn't buy any more tear gas. Obviously, that changed when the vote came through. But also over the weekend, the North Carolina Democratic Party approved a resolution calling for elected leaders to prohibit the use of tear gas. And the Mecklenburg County Sheriff, Gary McFadden, said his deputies would no longer use tear gas. What exactly does the city council resolution do? Does it just prohibit them from purchasing more for 1 year?
It does say prohibits the purchase and maintenance for 1 year. It also said, and we charged the Safe Communities Committee of the council to examine this effort of what we should be doing and how we should be managing crowd control. The whole emphasis of that resolution was, or that action was around crowd control. So I want to make it clear that we're not talking about the need for something like this, because there are many needs that the police can identify, as I say, through options of what they have to deal with that may be appropriate. But it is when we are having crowd control actions, what is the way that we do and deal with that?
Are you referring to 8 Can't Wait? That's the resolution that the council had voted on, requesting CMP to adopt this thing called 8 Can't Wait, which requires de-escalation, a ban on chokeholds, strangleholds, a warning before shooting, and more.
So I think that what we did in that resolution was that we actually recommended a review, but many of those policies that were included in that resolution, we already have in place. We require de-escalation, we require warnings, we do not use chokeholds and strangleholds. And I think that those actions, but I think what was important about that resolution was that it said that the city council will not accept racism and discrimination that lead to atrocities and erode trust. I think that we wanted to make sure that we were on the record of doing that, and that we are on the record that anything that we see in our department should be eligible for or should be reviewed, so that we make sure that whatever we're doing, just to check in, it's like, is it working? Is it something that needs to review? So that's what that resolution did. And that resolution came about through Larkin Eggleston's work, again, with the entire council. That was an 11-0 vote there. And of course, I really support it. I support anything that you say, here's an issue, here's how we're going to deal with it, we're going to review it, and we're going to make sure that it's up to our standards of today. So I wanted to mention one other thing. Malcolm Graham also asked that we do two things. He asked that we actually look at excessive force data, and the council is going to review how we can get that information so that we can look at trends around, does excessive force. There was this incident, the incident with Minneapolis, people are saying, well, they knew that. They knew about this police officer. Had he been doing other events that led to this one, or was ignored or not addressed? And Malcolm Graham asked that we look at that policy as well. So this is something that we are welcoming all ideas. All of them require us to examine what we have in place and do better.
There have been growing concerns nationwide about the increasing militarization of police departments, that from the gear that they wear to protect themselves from their own citizens, from the guns they carry to the rubber and pepper bullets that often hit people. We don't use rubber bullets in Charlotte, to reiterate what you just said earlier, to the tear gas and other chemical agents that have been used, to the armored vehicles on the streets, to the training that police often receive, and to the fact that many of today's police officers are coming from the ranks of the military, who have been trained to fight in wars. Are you concerned about the increasing militarization? And on the other side of that coin, are you concerned that by taking away some of the resources that police have at their disposal, that we are setting ourselves up for failure?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is the militarization in Charlotte. I am concerned about it as a mayor, I work often with more than 50 other mayors around, and a smaller cohort specifically in the South and along the East Coast. I work with them. And so when we're having these discussions, we talk about things like that. So I asked Chief Jennings if that was something that we participated in. We do not participate in the federal program that provides military equipment to local governments. So we, without me even knowing that, CMPD made that decision. And that's one of the things that, again, look at how thoughtful the leadership is in many ways. We always can do better and do things differently, but we aren't at that point in Charlotte that we have been doing that. So that's really one of those pluses that we need to think about.
There have been moves around the country to defund the police. Minneapolis their city council voted to get rid of their police department. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, or even if they know how they're going to do that. And I think it was a suggestion that they want to move toward, as opposed to just doing it in one fell swoop. Well, this is all coming out of this one moment in time, the murder by police of George Floyd. Will history look back on this and say that this was the moment the dam of 400 years of injustice broke?
I believe that that will be so. I believe that there'll be a lot of things written about how many Black men lost their lives to the tough on crime during the 60s and the 70s for cocaine use, and who made the money really off of cocaine use, and who got life prison and sentences. I think that there'll be times that we'll look and say, when did police officers think every Black man was weaponized and that they had to shoot to survive? I believe that. I believe that this is the time that the heat has risen to a boil, and that we will look back on this and say it was a catalyzing moment of examination of our country's efforts. I would hope, one of my biggest hopes is that we have a federal government that takes a serious look. We can't have police departments learning, let's say the top 100 cities, and every department does something differently. We have got to have some standardizations around rights of people to live in the city without being targeted because of racism and actions like that.
On Monday, we had Robert Dawkins on this program, the director of Action NC, and I asked him if he thought the political will for change exists here in Charlotte.
I can only tell you about Charlotte, and I don't think that there is the political will. I think that the city of Charlotte will do what it normally does. It will form some committees. They will talk about it, and when things don't change, they'll come back and do what they always do and say, I'm sorry.
I want to give you a chance to respond to that when we come back from the break, because obviously you and City Council will be riding this horse for a while. We'll do that. We'll talk about the fate of the Republican convention, the pandemic, and more with Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles as Charlotte Talks continues in just a moment on WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from WFAE members and the Whitewater Center, providing opportunities for engagement and building community through the active outdoor lifestyle. More at usnwc.org. And Northeastern University, where learners and innovators can access a lifetime of experience-driven discovery in Uptown Charlotte and throughout Northeastern's global university system of campuses and industry partners. Northeastern.edu/Charlotte. In-depth discussions like the one we're having this morning with Mayor Vi Lyles are just one of the many reasons you tune in to WFAE. And if you are a regular listener, you know that you receive a lot of value from Charlotte Talks. Well, today we are asking you to give something back. Your financial contribution helps pay for all the news, analysis, thoughtful discussions that you value. Please join us right now with a contribution at 704-549-9000 or online at WFAE.org.
Hey y'all, this is Tommy Tomlinson. On this week's episode of Southbound, we talked to Regina Bradley, a professor and author who has an upcoming book on the Atlanta hip-hop duo Outkast. You can find this and every episode of Southbound on Apple Podcasts, NPR One, and WFAE.org.
Support for Southbound comes from Southeast Radiation Oncology Group.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. Mayor Vi Lyles is with us for her monthly visit to the program. And I just played a piece of tape from a previous show this week with Robert Dawkins, who's the director of Action NC. He's been working closely with police and policymakers, and he was willing to voice a politically incorrect opinion about what the impact of this will be if there is, in fact, the political will to make a difference, at least here in Charlotte. He says no. What do you say?
You know, I want to say first, I speak with Robert Dawkins often. He has a really good way of addressing the tougher issues in this country and in the city. And he counsels many of us on the city council around his knowledge and awareness of what's going on in the community, but also people, he's a policy guy. He's really talking about policy. So let me say this. I think Robert is speaking from our past experiences, and that is true. We have a task force, we have a committee, we do something, and so he's if you've never done anything differently, why expect it to change? And so I have a lot of respect for that, and I think that is something we're all dealing with. I don't want a task force. I don't want a committee. I mean, how do we see doing something immediately to address racism? How do we get people to put that in their corporate value statements? How do we actually honestly have a conversation about race and racism? I've been through a lot of these. CBI started out. Joe Martin's have lunch with someone differently than you in race and come to agreement. Our faith-based communities, Mecklenburg Ministries, a lot of our faith communities, their leaders are talking about this. I don't know exactly what we're going to do yet. And I don't want it to be what we've always done. So what do we do that's different? We need to work on that. And Robert's right. He should expect some change. But if we don't do it, he'll be the one that says, you know, this is the way Charlotte does stuff. Task force, sorry, couple of $100 and here we go.
Let's shift gears a little bit here, because City Council also passed a budget on Monday night for the next fiscal year with a 3% decrease in money from this year, and it doesn't dip into the rainy day funds, and no core services will be cut. So where are the savings coming from?
Well, the savings came from an internal review by the city manager and the leaders of the city. And when I say leaders, I actually mean the guys that are, and men and women that are working on a daily basis. They came up with ideas of ways to save money. They knew that this community in this pandemic, we're suffering high unemployment. People are still frightened of the virus, and they came up with the ways to reduce it. They were elimination of positions. There were better ways of doing things, more emphasis on getting the most out of what's available to you. So I think that you have to say it was the managers and the people that work for this organization.
Property taxes will stay the same under this budget. The water and sewer fees will rise by about $1.24 a month on average. Solid waste fees will go up about 80 cents a month on average. What about the affordable housing bonds?
Well, we do have planned 2 bond referendums this fall. And in November on the ballot, we will have another $50 million for affordable housing. I am so proud of the community for proving 2 years ago, 69% of the voters voted for the affordable housing bonds. We'll also have a transportation bond. I wish we could change the language to mobility, because we're going to be doing sidewalks, bikeways, congestion mitigation projects, and that will also be on the ballot. Transportation bonds pretty much sin or pass all the time. I'm hoping that people will give us some real recognition of the number of units that we've been able, over 3,000 this year, to fund with our $50 million. And I know that this is one of the fundamental issues is getting better wages, getting health care, a place to live, and the ability to move around the city. And that's what we're all about. Those were the things that we talked about with the city council in January. That's what the city council embraced. And while we've had to deal with the pandemic, we've had to deal with protests, we don't forget about those things that make a city work.
So that was going to be, I had a whole slew of questions about the Republican National Convention for you, and some of them have gone out the window because of the news this morning that the main convention, the big brouhaha night, the big party night, the acceptance speech, may be going today, according to the Washington Post, to Jacksonville. They report seeking a city willing to allow a large-scale event amid the coronavirus pandemic. Republicans have tentatively settled on Jacksonville as the new destination for the premier festivities of the convention in August. The details of the arrangement, they say, are still in flux, and RNC aides are scrambling to determine whether the city in Florida has enough hotel rooms to accommodate the event, which typically kicks off the final stretch of the presidential campaign. Officials for the RNC were in Jacksonville yesterday, looking around. The lower profile business events, they say, are still tentatively scheduled for Charlotte. Were you aware of all this?
You know, I'm not aware of the RNC's decision of where they want to host it, but it's been widely reported in media, and you're completely aware that the idea of having the convention as envisioned in 2020, I'm sorry, I'm just losing it here. It's a little bit of exhaustion. 2 years ago, we knew that this was going to be what we thought was going to be a huge way to publicize how this city could host 2 national conventions. But then the pandemic happened, COVID-19 happened, and we have talked about this, that's been publicly stated, that we have to keep our residents and visitors healthy and well, and that we could not host a convention without having metrics in place for keeping the virus from growing or not causing more growth in the virus, because we already see our numbers are going up.
Yeah, the numbers are going up fast and quickly, particularly in Mecklenburg. And according to the Observer this morning, Mecklenburg needs to test 20,000 residents a day if they want to slow this virus. And that's about 10 times as many as we are testing today. But tests don't cure the virus. They don't really slow the virus. They just tell you how many people are carrying it around with them. So why do we need to do 20,000 tests a day?
Well, I'm not the public health director, and I'm not going to start guessing medical wise, but I watch a lot of TV on the virus. So let me say that what my understanding is that when you're asymptomatic, you need to know how many of those folks are out there that are asymptomatic, so that the numbers that you can use from that can allow you to make better projections around your vulnerable populations. So if you've got a healthy person carrying the virus, and they're going home to their grandmother or their granddad, that's one of the things that you can find out. So I know that we've also started doing a lot more contact tracing. So if someone has the virus, going out and finding out where they've been, more testing is necessary. And especially we're addressing some of the issues around vulnerable populations, the nursing homes, as well as African-American communities or people with chronic diseases. So I'm not the public health director, but I think she's doing a great job.
One of the reasons that the Republicans are looking at Jacksonville is because the president insists on having an open convention which can seat 19,000 people in the Spectrum Arena if we host it, and that those people should not have to socially distance, and those people should not and will not be wearing masks. The governor of North Carolina has called that irresponsible. It seems to be something that the people in Florida, at least the mayor of Jacksonville and the governor of Florida, are embracing. Is it just Democrats versus Republicans? Do you also think that holding a convention like that in this time period is irresponsible?
I believe that we want to reopen our city. I know that reopening our city is important. And I also believe that we have a dichotomy of being open for business, as well as being sure that we don't go back into the recurrence of the number of cases that impact our ability to care for the people that have the cases. So I would hope that any convention that we have, and we had a report from Tom Murray this past Monday, that we really don't have anything until the fall. That to me says that people that are planning major events are cautious enough about the caring for their own participants in these meetings that they are going to wait until we find out what happens in August. I think the governor said, we don't know what it's going to be like in August. The indications right now are not good. And we have to listen to science and data, and we still have to help people. So yesterday we announced the $35 million loan fund for small businesses, $10,000 for people that have businesses with less than 6 employees, and those with less than 25 employees, 25,000. A simple grant application, June the 22nd, because we know that people are hurting and we want to get this money into the economy. And that while we can't host all the tourism events that we're planned in July and August, those folks are not necessarily coming, or they are waiting to find out closer to the date. We want to start helping our small businesses get prepared. So that's
Well,
our job.
business is really hurting, as you point out, and having this convention, I'm sure they were all the downtown restaurants and hotels and things were planning on this and have been planning on it for 2 years. It's a windfall. Under this circumstance, it might be a terrible windfall in a medical situation. But if the president and the party were willing to scale back their expectations on social distancing and mask wearing, would you still want this convention here, knowing that 19,000 people would be in the Spectrum Center? How much would you be willing to have it if they scaled back, and how much scaling back would they have to do?
I'm not quite sure that I'm getting it, because the pandemic and the viruses are real. So I don't have these kind of like, well, what if tomorrow it went away? Because I know it's not going to go away. And the idea that we would have 19,000 people in our center city without having the requirements of social distancing and wearing masks and all of those things that have helped us get to where we are. I kind of look at Governor Cuomo, who said that he just reopened New York City this week. And he did it because the people of New York, they took the hardest and the most difficult requirements, and they stuck to them by most of those, so that they could open safely. And that's the reality of it. We can't just open and leave ourselves vulnerable to sickness.
Well, the nature of this convention, it's here, it's not here, it's on again, it's off again. It seems to be changing almost hourly over the last several days, since the president in the last week or so said he wanted it to be open and he wanted an answer now. I would imagine, since we're still under contractual obligations to hold this thing until they say we're not coming, that we have to get ready. Are we spending money to get ready for it? And what does the city do if they decide to move it? Do we get the money back?
This is a contract obligation, and we have looked at it just as that. So today, if they said, well, we went to Jacksonville and we couldn't make it work, and we're going to make it work and prescribe to the requirements for the COVID-19, we would host this convention because we have that obligation. But we're in a pandemic. They have to make that decision on their own. And whatever decision they make, that's when we start talking about how the contract works. And I can't speak to that right now.
So you're telling me, you won't tell me whether or not, if we say you absolutely can't do this, can they come after us? Even though they've decided to move it to Jacksonville, can they come after us for damages? And if they decide to move it to Jacksonville, can we go after them for damages?
I did not go to law school. And I know that we hire people to do this work. But if you watch some of the city council meetings, you've heard council members talk about this. I think that we accepted a $50 million security grant, and there are expenses that we've made, and we have would expect that grant would cover those expenses because we have dealt with this in good faith. And that's the most important thing. We have to always act under the contract in good faith. In order
some of that $50 million went to materials for the police to ensure security here for this convention. Do we have to give that money back if we don't have the convention, or do we have to send that equipment to Jacksonville?
If we have worked in good faith, we have no obligations that we haven't fulfilled. That's the way that I look at this.
This all came down, this back and forth between Governor Cooper, this game of chicken between the governor and the president, just in the last couple of weeks. But the New York Times has reported that as far back as January, The president was having misgivings about holding the convention in this city. Do you have any regrets getting into a contract with a party headed by somebody who's known for breaking contracts?
I have no regrets about going after something that the city would have benefited from in the way that we planned at the beginning. I mean, it would have been amazing to have this opportunity to be on international media. It would have been a great opportunity to fill every hotel room. It would have been difficult, perhaps, because of the president's presence for us for a number of reasons. But 2 years ago, I feel like we were doing the right thing. Today, I feel like we have to do the same right thing.
Jim Morrill and Tim Funk writing an article about this in the Observer, I think a week ago, named the winners and losers for an RNC pullout. You were among the winners. Do you feel like one?
Right now, Mike, between the RNC, the COVID-19, the discussions we're having around policing in this community, what I feel is energized enough to focus on those things that we can do. And for me, it's not about winning. When people in the city have a place to work, that they can get paid, and they have health care, and they have a place to live, then I win.
Mayor Vi Lyles, who joins us, we hope she will continue to join us about once a month. We thank you for the hour today. I know you're pretty busy right now, but thank you for the hour. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Wendy Herkey is